Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's seminar. We're honored to have four esteemed professors, Sam, John, Jack, and Daniel, with us today to discuss one of the most profound themes in William Shakespeare's Hamlet, the relationship between vengeance and justice. Throughout the play, Shakespeare presents revenge not as a noble pursuit, but as a deeply flawed path that ultimately leads to destruction.
Thank you for having us today. I'm John. We're also excited to delve into this discussion, as we firmly believe that Hamlet presents a powerful critique of revenge and its consequences. After analyzing the play, we developed the following thesis. In William Shakespeare's play, Hamlet explored the concept that revenge is a fundamentally flawed path, often fueled by justice, due to the capacity to inflict internal degradation, the creation of a state of uncontrollable chaotic retribution, the distorting of justice by substituting vendetta for moral equity, and culminating a cyclical act of vengeance.
Thank you so much, John. The first question I want to ask is for Sam. Can you elaborate on the concept of internal degradation and how it applies to characters in the play?
William Shakespeare's Hamlet discusses the complexities of revenge and its horrific effects on identity. The play shows how the pursuit of vengeance, while often justified by a sense of justice, can lead to internal degradation. Through the various likes of Hamlet, Laertes, and Claudius, Shakespeare demonstrates that revenge is not just simply a flawed path, but also a stimulant for self-erosion. This concept of internal degradation refers to the gradual breakdown of an individual's identity, values, and sense of purpose.
So, in what ways does Hamlet's descent into madness reflect this internal struggle with his own identity?
In the play, this is primarily portrayed through Hamlet's transformation as he becomes completely immersed in his mission to avenge his father's death. Initially, Hamlet appears to have a thoughtful and philosophical persona. However, once Hamlet's father's ghost explains that Claudius is his murderer, Hamlet's fixation on revenge sets him on a path of self-destruction. Harold Scalzi stated, "It would seem revenge is an indulgence of the fallen will, and the honor that claims to control it for all its legalism is will all over again." Scalzi, 1970. Scalzi implies that the concept of honor, which is often used to justify acts of revenge, is not really a moral compass, but rather an expression of the same selfish will. Hamlet explains this further, stating, "And am I revenge to take him in the purging of his soul when he is fit and seasoned for his passage? No." Act 3, Scene 3. This twisted show of mercy on Claudius is a reference that Hamlet is not guided by true honor or justice, but his desire to ensure Claudius's suffering is eternal. As Hamlet pursues a form of madness to aid in his plot of revenge, the fine line between his acting and his genuine mental state starts to blur. This is suggesting that his quest of vengeance is eating away at his true self.
Okay, so what does Laertes' impulsive nature reveal about the danger of unchecked rage?
Laertes serves as a threat to Hamlet, showing another way of how revenge can lead to internal degradation. When Laertes learns about his father's death and Ophelia's madness, his grief is manipulated into rage. Unlike Hamlet, who is consistently stuck in his own indecision, Laertes is an impulsive and single-minded person in pursuit of revenge against Hamlet. Although this rage distorts his ability to see things clearly and for what they are, he becomes a pawn for Claudius by agreeing to a rigged duel. This shows that Laertes' quick willingness to abandon his own honor and integrity in the chase for revenge can corrupt foundational morals bestowed upon someone, no matter how strong they may seem. Quote, "My lord, I will be ruled the rather if you could devise it so that I might be the organ." Act 4, Scene 7. Laertes' willingness to blindly cooperate with Claudius over matters of revenge show how desperate and easily tricked a person with no direction may be. Only in Laertes' final moments does he experience a moment of clarity and remorse, showing the toll his revenge has taken on his soul and his physical body.
How does Claudius's ambition set off a tragic cycle of revenge in Hamlet?
Claudius is the original instigator of the play's cycle of revenge. His internal degradation can be seen through his murder of Hamlet's father, which is driven by his ambition of becoming the king of Denmark. However, once Hamlet attempts to figure out the truth, Claudius's sense of guilt begins to eat away at his identity. Quote, "Oh, my offense is rank, it smells to heaven." Act 3, Scene 3. Claudius's soliloquy exposes his knowledge of his moral erosion, signifying that he's aware of his issues. However, instead of repentance, he basically doubles down on his offenses by plotting against Hamlet's death. Also, Claudius's attempts to get rid of Hamlet by sending him to England displays that he's bothered by Hamlet's actions and being affected by his surroundings. The play's plot points share resemblance to the Black Panther storyline, where Claudius's hidden murders haunt the kingdom, and T'Chaka's murder of his brother Njobu creates a hidden wound in Wakanda's history. These events create a snowball effect by pushing both Hamlet and Killmonger, Njobu's son, down a tragic path of revenge. Claudius, like Njobu, both took on rash measures to maintain a powerful advantage, causing revenge plots to be set in motion, leading to both their demise. This descent into corruption further exemplifies how Claudius's fear of revenge leads him to become even more monstrous, ultimately causing his own downfall.
Wow, that was great insight. Last question for you, Sam, is how does internal degradation manifest differently in each of the main characters' drive for revenge?
Overall, Shakespeare uses these characters to explore the broader theme that revenge is a flawed path that leads to self-destruction. The internal degradation seen in Hamlet, Laertes, and Claudius misjudges how vengeance, even when being motivated by justice, has a corrupting influence. It literally warps their identities, leading them into actions that betray their true former selves. Hamlet ultimately offers an important view on the dangers of revenge and how fragile the human spirit can be when consumed by it.
Thank you so much, Sam. Now let's turn the table to John. Could you begin by explaining how the idea of a boundless retribution emerges in the play?
Yeah, of course. A prime example is King Claudius' remark to Laertes: "No place indeed should murder satirize, revenge should have no bounds." Act 4, Scene 7. Here, Claudius insists that murder should never go unpunished and that revenge have no limits. The statement reveals how easily retribution can spiral out of control once linked to a sense of justice. By encouraging Laertes to relentlessly pursue Hamlet, Claudius demonstrates how the desire to correct a wrong can quickly become unhinged from morality. The idea that revenge should have no bounds will remove any sense of restraint, allowing vengeance to spread uncontrollably. Instead of achieving justice, it leads to chaos, consuming not just the intended target, but everyone else, innocent or not.
Wow, that makes sense. Could you expand on the consequences of such unchecked and chaotic vengeance, especially in the moment where Hamlet kills Polonius?
When Hamlet exclaims, "Thou wretched, rash, intruding fool, farewell, I took thee for thy better," Act 3, Scene 4, we witness the tragic unpredictability of vengeance. Hamlet intends to strike Claudius, but in his impulsive wrath, he kills Polonius instead. This incident shows how the pursuit of revenge can blur the line between righteous justice and reckless violence. Once driven by a fervor to avenge perceived wrongs, Hamlet abandons the caution and moral clarity he initially values. Shakespeare uses this turning point to show that when revenge is fueled by blind rage rather than rational judgment, it often leads to unintended consequences. Innocent people suffer, and the cycle of violence escalates beyond anyone's control.
Finally, we see a powerful acknowledgement of this destructive spiral in Laertes' dying words. How does this confession tie everything together?
Well, Laertes realizes the fatal irony of his actions when he declares, "Why, as a woodcock to my own springe, Osric, I'm justly killed with my own treasury." Act 5, Scene 2. By comparing himself to a bird caught in his own trap, Laertes acknowledges that his own scheme for revenge has led to his own downfall. His words reinforce the idea that vengeance rarely unfolds as intended, as rather than delivering justice, it often harms those who seek it. Shakespeare makes it clear that revenge is a dangerous and self-destructive force. Those who believe they can control it ultimately fall victim to their own pursuit. In the end, the play Hamlet warns that the vengeance, no matter how justified it may seem, has the power to destroy not only the target but those who wield it as a weapon, further expressing chaos and revenge.
So, Professor John, in your sense, in Hamlet, revenge can turn into an uncontrollable force quickly, consuming both Hamlet and everyone around him. You argue this is a universal theme, but can you connect this to an example?
Absolutely. One modern example is the TV show Rick and Morty, and his main storyline of Rick's revenge crusade against evil Rick. Rick, just like Hamlet, is driven by a personal sense of justice, as evil Rick murdered his wife right in front of him. This pursuit of revenge leads him down to a path of absolute destruction. His vendetta took millions of lives across the galaxies, led multiple other revenge plot planned on him by others, and ultimately he developed an idea of nihilism.
So, does that mean there's a parallel between Shakespeare's depiction of revenge and the consequences in Rick and Morty?
Yes, Hamlet's revenge doesn't restore balance, it annihilates it, just as Rick's action unraveled the very fabric of reality. Both describes how vengeance warps mortality into chaos. Rick's realization that killing evil Rick only deepens the emptiness in his heart and his despair, just as Hamlet's pursuit of vengeance leaves him trapped in an existential crisis. The lesson in both cases is clear. Revenge does not bring a resolution, it breeds endless destruction and chaos, proving itself to be a self perpetuating cycle of ruin. Shakespeare's insight remains as relevant now as ever.
Last question for Professor John. Erlando, a researcher, also touches on a theme of vengeance and states it's flawed as nearly everyone dies. Does this relate to the overall view?
Well, this researcher Lando states, quote, "The fact that by the end of the play, all the main characters, entire families, are wiped from the face of the earth hardly testify to a selective and defensible principle of order. Nor is the fact that the play's villains happen to be among the dead a persuasive sign of successful revenge." End quote. This shows how revenge in Hamlet drives chaos as it eradicates many characters. Therefore, further proves that vengeance in a play is not successful. If it truly worked, it would restore order. Instead, the whole Denmark government falls as a result of the chaos revenge.
Thank you, John. Now let's move on to Professor Daniel. How does the play of Hamlet explore the relationship between vengeance and justice?
The play of Hamlet explores the complex relationship between vengeance and justice, and how the repeating cycle of achieving justice through means of revenge ultimately lead towards chain of destruction. Hamlet is consumed by an intense need to avenge his father, using revenge as a method to cope with his very powerful grief. While Hamlet is grieving, everyone else seems to move on with their lives rather quickly, and this really gets to Hamlet. The result of this is that Hamlet is sent into a downward spiral, and some scholars argue that Hamlet has actually gone mad. Throughout the play, it becomes clear that Shakespeare presents that using vengeance as a form of dealing with grief and loss is a flawed ideology that ultimately leads to a very dark path. Afras Sofi Abdul Hussein says the dynamic relationship between retribution and insanity, the consequences between ethical ambiguity, and the lethal results for both the seeker and the victims underscore Shakespeare's profound analysis of the human experience and the dangers of uncontrolled retribution. Hussein 2024. She highlights how the key ideas of Hamlet's moral dilemmas when it comes to his idea for revenge not only harm others, but also harm himself, and how Shakespeare uses this to shed light on how, when seeking revenge, we may perform unreasonable actions that even we would not agree with when we are in a calmer headspace.
Very interesting, Daniel. How does Hamlet use vengeance and justice as a tool to cope with his sorrows, and how's his mental state while seeking revenge?
Hamlet's grief fuels his desire for revenge, which in turn makes him seem obsessed with getting revenge. Hamlet's mental and emotional state is also questionable and takes many unpredictable turns, and even after he confirms that Claudius is his father's killer, he does not act for months. However, this changes when Hamlet says, "Oh, from this time forth, my thoughts be bloody, or be nothing worth," in Act 4, Scene 4. This is the moment that marks his descent into a destructive obsession with vengeance, because he no longer sees any value to any of his thoughts that are not related to avenging his father. For months before this, he has been looking for the perfect opportunity to get revenge, however, he has not taken any action. This is the point in the play when Hamlet's sudden change of mind occurs, and he is finally ready to take action.
Do you believe that as the audiences should consider whether the revenge will change the avenger?
Yes, as the audience, we should definitely consider significant changes Hamlet goes through. Hamlet himself transforms throughout the play from a very careful man who had a strong desire for certainty to ensure his actions are correct into a reckless maniac leaving behind a path of destruction. Hamlet's obsession with revenge warps his soul and causes him to undergo a massive switch in his character as he changes from hesitant to impulsive. At the start of the play, Hamlet makes extremely careful and precise thought-out decisions while spending months of time figuring out who actually killed his father. However, as his desire for revenge becomes increasingly stronger, this idea of revenge in his mind gives way to perform these reckless actions. He becomes so consumed with getting revenge on Claudius that he is no longer a careful and a moral man that he was when the play started. This goes as far as him stabbing Polonius from behind the curtain of Gertrude's private room, simply because he heard a noise from behind the curtain. He wanted it to be the king, but without even thinking to consider that it might not be Claudius behind the curtain, he had already stabbed Polonius. Even after this altercation, Hamlet shows very little remorse for killing Polonius, and when talking about his own actions, rather than taking accountability for killing Polonius, he says, "Heaven pleased it so, to punish me with this, and this with me," in Act 3, Scene 4. This highlights Hamlet's character shift, since he even lacks the morality to admit that he made a grave mistake, but rather he just says that heaven punished him with this. The domino effect of Polonius' death leaves behind is meant to serve as a message to the reader that revenge is not the path to justice. Revenge only makes the situation worse. In the novel The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexandre Dumas and Auguste Maquet, the main character, Edmond Dantes, also spends a long time to carefully execute a planned revenge plot, just as Hamlet does. However, in the end, Edmond Dantes abandons his plan of getting revenge, since unlike Hamlet, who continues to pursue his obsession with revenge, Edmond Dantes realizes that true justice comes from mercy.
So, final question to Professor Daniel. Does revenge truly lead to justice?
Well, in a nutshell, revenge does not lead to true justice. It only leads to a nasty cycle of vengeance that leads to more suffering for everybody involved. A quote encapsulating this is when Hamlet says, "Why, man, did they make love to this employment? They are not near my conscience. Their defeat does by their own insinuation grow." Hamlet says this when discussing how he sent Rosencrantz and Guildenstern to their death in England. Both Rosencrantz and Guildenstern did previously spy on Hamlet when he was acting crazy, and King Claudius told him to check up on Hamlet and see what was going on. But previously, before Hamlet's entire revenge plot began, they all used to be friends. Yet now, Hamlet shows zero remorse, and he even justifies himself by saying that their death is their own fault. In Hamlet's wild pursuit of revenge, Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, who were previously Hamlet's friends, were sucked into Hamlet's dreadful path of destruction. So, revenge does not truly lead to justice.
Thank you, Professor Daniel. Now, last but not least, Professor Jack. How does Shakespeare show revenge as a cycle in Hamlet?
Well, firstly, Shakespeare shows revenge leads to more revenge, making it a cyclical process that ultimately leads to destruction. The play begins with Hamlet wanting to avenge his father's murder, but as the play continues, we can see how this vengeance that Hamlet has with Claudius spreads to other characters within the play. And not only does it lead to destruction, this demonstrates that revenge is not a solution and is inherently flawed.
How does Hamlet's desire for revenge impact his actions?
Well, since the start of the play, we watch Hamlet obsess about avenging his father's death. Despite this obsession, Hamlet does not act on avenging his father until much later within the play. At the start of the play, he doesn't act on avenging his father until he had solid proof that Claudius killed him. However, he still ended up waiting a long period of time after he had gotten this proof. And his first action against his father wasn't even his father at all. It was Polonius. Hamlet ends up killing Polonius instead of Claudius. So Hamlet's obsession for revenge leads him to kill Polonius. Later on, Hamlet says, "From this time forth, my thoughts will be bloody or worth nothing." Since Hamlet hasn't gotten revenge at this point, he finally decides to avenge his father. However, these actions do not solve anything in his life, and ultimately, his need for revenge leads to multiple deaths, including his own.
So, how exactly does revenge in Hamlet lead to more revenge?
Well, one clear example of how revenge leads to more revenge is the killing of Polonius thinking that he's Claudius, as I've previously mentioned. Because of this, Polonius' son, Laertes, says, "I'll only be revenged most thoroughly for my father." Hamlet's desire for revenge ends up killing Polonius, but this itself leads to more revenge against Hamlet from Polonius' son. This clearly shows that revenge leads to more revenge. You can also see that revenge is passed down generationally in Hamlet, as Fortinbras wanted to claim the land that his father lost to old Hamlet, showing that revenge and vengeance leads to continuous conflict.
What is the role of Laertes in the cycle of revenge?
Well, Laertes is the exact opposite of Hamlet, as he acts without hesitation. His rage over his father's death was manipulated by Claudius because Claudius wanted to kill Hamlet. Laertes continued this cycle of revenge, as Hamlet taking revenge leads to Laertes taking revenge on Hamlet. Laertes admits that revenge is destructive right before he dies, as he says, "I am justly killed with mine own treachery." Laertes shows how revenge leads to destruction through this quote. Furthermore, expert Soma's son Dadarm explains that Laertes, like Hamlet, is driven by revenge, similar to Hamlet. As he says, the temperament of retribution firmly involved Laertes all throughout the occasions of the play.
Does Claudius also contribute to the cycle of revenge?
Well, absolutely. Claudius sets this cycle of revenge into motion. He does this by killing old Hamlet. Of course, when he killed old Hamlet, his son Hamlet decided to enact revenge on Claudius. But out of fear of the revenge that Hamlet was going to enact on him, Claudius attempts to kill him. However, these decisions he made result in the death of his wife Gertrude, Hamlet's death, and the downfall of Denmark. Claudius also uses revenge as a way to control people like he did with the Laertes. However, by the end of the play, Claudius also falls victim to revenge.
Lastly, Professor Jack, can you connect the theme of revenge to literature?
Well, one of the most popular pieces of literature that deals with revenge is The Godfather. Similar to Hamlet, the characters in The Godfather are trapped in a cycle of revenge that leads to destruction. An example of this would be Michael Corleone's revenge on another mafia don when they had killed his wife in an explosion. In The Godfather, different mafias have been fighting and have been trapped in a cycle of vengeance and revenge against each other for a long period of time. This is obviously very similar to Hamlet, as they both have been trapped in a cycle of revenge.
Thank you, Professor Jack, and thanks to everyone else for their valuable insights. It's clear that everyone here today at this conference has gained a lot of knowledge. With that, we officially reached the end of this interview. I want to extend my sincere thanks to each of you for your time and for joining us today, and a big thank you to everyone in the audience for listening. Wishing you all the best moving forward, and feel free to reach out anytime.